Virtualization is something that's being used almost everywhere. You might even be using it on your home laptop without even realizing it. From servers to your home PCs to the big applications that you use, everything is using virtualization in some way. In today's video, I'm going to explain exactly what is virtualization, and I'm going to show you how you can get your first hands-on experience with some virtualization tech. As always, if you have any questions with virtualization or anything related to all of the amazing tech that we've covered, feel free to join the Discord server. You can find all the links down in the description. With that being said, let's get started. Before I start talking about virtualization, there's something that you need to get cleared up with. Virtualization doesn't mean that you no longer require your hardware resources. You still require a computer, whether it's your laptop, a desktop PC, a server, whatever. Virtualization simply means that you're creating a lot of tiny mini computers from this one piece of physical computer hardware. Let me show you exactly what I mean, and I'll help you visualize this whole thing. So here I am in XCaliDraw, and we all know that XCaliDraw is the best way to visualize what I'm saying and understand all of those concepts. So first we have some physical hardware here. This entire layer here is the physical hardware. Now this could be your laptop, could be your MacBook, or a simple Windows or Linux laptop. It could be one of your desktop PCs, or this could be a server as well. Let's talk about in terms of servers, because that will be the easiest way to understand this whole concept of virtualization and why would you even want it. Now, assume that this whole hardware here is a server hardware. Now, if you know how powerful servers are, you are very aware that one single user cannot use all of these resources. Instead of this one entire server being used by just one single user, let's split it up. Now by splitting up, I mean that this one physical hardware, let's make multiple computers out of it. Now obviously you can't get something like a cutter and literally cut your physical hardware. No, that's going to literally break the entire PC. Or server in this case. So instead, there is a process called as virtualization, which is going to help us divide this physical hardware into multiple smaller sections of hardware. So let me explain how that entire process would look like. Normally, you have your hardware, and on top of that, you'll have your operating system, right? Let's assume that this is the case over here, that you have one big piece of hardware and you have some normal operating system on top of it. But now again, like I mentioned before, one single user is not going to be able to use all of these resources. So they're going to get wasted. So instead, let's create multiple computers out of this hardware. Now, we have the hardware and we have the operating system. In order to virtualize this hardware, we have another layer. So on top of your operating system, you have a tiny little program called as the hypervisor. Now the hypervisor is simply something which is going to enable us to create this entire virtualization process. What the hypervisor basically does is it provisions resources from your hardware layer itself and assigns it to a bunch of other tiny computers. So this entire diagram which I showed you, this is just going to be your physical hardware. Alright, this is everything that is going to exist physically on the physical hardware. Now beyond this point is where we're going to actually touch into virtualization. Now this hypervisor is something that's going to be installed on top of your physical hardware, right? And this hypervisor will act to create virtual devices. So let's take a look at that. The hypervisor, what it will do is it will talk to the physical hardware, and the physical hardware will provision the hypervisor with some system resources. So stuff like your RAM, CPU, and other things. Now the hypervisor will take these provisioned resources and it will create a virtual computer. So this virtual computer, let's say we have one right here. It will have its own set of hardware, and on top of it you can install a different operating system as well. And on top of this operating system you can have whatever other smaller applications that you want. This entire thing which the hypervisor has created, this is what we call as a virtual machine or a virtual computer, and that's done through the power of virtualization. Alright, does that make sense so far? If you're still confused about the whole thing, drop into the Discord server and I can explain it more. And we also have a great community of techies who can explain the whole concept of virtualization to you. Alright, so that's the basic concepts behind virtualization. Now I want to talk to you about how you can actually get up and running with a virtual machine. So there are two pieces of software which I want to talk about, which you can use for creating virtual machine. The first is VirtualBox from Oracle. This is something which allows you to create virtual environments on your PC. Now, just as a disclaimer, if you try to use VirtualBox without configuring anything in your BIOS, this might fail. So, first thing which I want you to do in order to actually create virtual machines is head over into your BIOS. In order to do that, while you're booting up your PC, press F2 on your keyboard and you'll enter the BIOS. Within the BIOS, search for a setting called as virtualization. Now, depending on what CPU you're using, the name for that will be different. On Intel, it's called as Intel Virtualization Technology. Just enable that. I'm not sure what it's called on AMD, but you can probably Google it and figure that out. So once you've done that in the BIOS, I want you to go ahead and download and install VirtualBox. This is what we can use for creating virtual machines. Before I show you hands-on about creating VMs with VirtualBox, I also want to talk about QEMU. Now this is also another software which allows you to create virtual machines and virtual environments. If you're on a Linux-based system and you want to play around with virtual environments, I encourage you to get some hands-on with QEMU and just try to learn how it works. I'm going to show you the example with VirtualBox. So right here I am in VirtualBox, and as you can see I've got literally nothing. I've got no VMs here. So I'm going to show you how you can create a VM. Step 1, go and click on new, give your virtual machine a name. So I'm just going to make it an Arch, and by typing Arch, this VirtualBox software has automatically detected that I'm going to be running a Linux distro and Arch Linux. But again, I can choose from all these different types of operating kernels. The type over here is referring to kernel, so you can use Linux kernel, the Windows kernel, BSD, or anything else. And what version am I going to use? I'm going to use Arch Linux for this, but again, you have options for all these different distributions. So now that's done. Now we need an ISO image. So for this, I'm going to go ahead and select my ISO image for Arch Linux. If you don't have the ISO for the particular distribution, head over to the website of your distro and download the ISO image, and then just navigate to its location and select the ISO image. Now before I click on finish and actually start the install process, let's look at some other settings as well. So under the hardware field, I want you to give this at least 1 GB of memory. The memory is simply the amount of RAM which you're giving it. And under processors, if you have a lot of processors, if you have like 16 cores, then feel free to give it more, but I'm just leaving it with 1. And under hard disk, you can decide how much storage space do you want to give it. So let's say I give it around 31 gigs, and that's all I want to do. There's no need to mess around with this VirtualBox disk image, and I can click on finish, and it has created my VM. Now I can simply double click on this VM and it will start my entire VM. So right there, it's starting up my VM and it's put me in the Arch installation menu, which is exactly what I expected it to do. Now if I just wait for a couple of minutes, it'll take me to the screen which you see when you're trying to install Arch Linux. Just give it a minute and we can take a look at that. So right here, this is the menu which you get when you try to install Arch Linux, and you can see that it's exactly the same as if you are trying to install it on your physical hardware. So that's the power of VirtualBox. In one of our future videos, we'll go over the entire installation process for Arch Linux within this particular VirtualBox. Now, just a disclaimer, your performance within the VirtualBox might be slow depending on how much resources you allocated. Since I have a pretty weak laptop, I assigned less cores and less memory to this VM, so obviously its performance is going to be a little degraded. So that's how you can get up and running with different virtual machines. I explained to you what is virtualization, and I've also shown you how you can get started with creating your own VMs and putting any sort of OS on it. So feel free to download Oracle's VirtualBox, create some VMs and play around with it, and I'll see you all in the next video.